Welcome to the Deep Dive. We're the place you come to when you want to really get under the skin of complex topics, cut through all that surface noise and find the insights that actually matter.
And today we're diving into something really fascinating. It's this kind of paradox, right? You've got these huge global movements like Alcoholics Anonymous, which clearly have a spiritual core, but they're not just surviving, they're thriving, expanding even, in a world that seems to be getting more and more secular every day.
Right. So how does that work?
Well, that's our mission for this deep dive. We're going to really dissect the core texts, look at the history, the psychology behind something like the 12 steps. We want to figure out how that spiritual language, especially tricky concepts like a higher power, gets interpreted universally.
And why it still seems to be so effective, even for people who wouldn't call themselves religious at all. Agnostics, atheists.
Exactly. It's about understanding the mechanism. How does this language work in a way that goes beyond specific religious dogma?
Yeah, because that's the big question, isn't it? If you're looking at this from the outside, especially if you live somewhere pretty secular, maybe Northern Europe, or somewhere where organized religion isn't a big part of daily life,
right?
You see a program that talks about relying on God as we understood him, and you think, how on earth do I fit into that? How do I navigate those 12 steps if that whole God concept just isn't part of my world? So we really need to unpack how these recovery frameworks draw that line between, let's say, general spirituality and specific organized religion.
And that distinction, that's absolutely crucial. It's kind of the secret sauce, maybe. Sources we've looked at make it really clear. The whole reason these movements endure and work globally comes down to their adaptability.
Adaptability, okay.
Yeah. Time and again, the evidence suggests the underlying mechanism, the thing that actually creates change. It's fundamentally psychological, it's behavioral, it's about community. Regardless of what label you put on it, the specific name you give to the power or the process that facilitates the change seems less important than the process itself.
Interesting. So the wrapper can change, but the core mechanics work universally.
That's the idea we're exploring.
Okay, so let's start right there. At what seems like the biggest potential roadblock for someone coming from a secular background. Step 2.
Right, the big one.
The wording itself. We came to believe that a power greater than ourselves could restore us to sanity. Now imagine you've just walked into a room feeling completely beaten, like you've lost all control.
That's the typical starting point.
And then you hear that phrase, that word power, especially capitalized. It could immediately make someone think, uh-oh, here comes the religion part. They're going to ask me to sign up for something I just don't believe in.
Yeah, that resistance is totally understandable. And actually, the program anticipates it. It has to anticipate it.
How so?
Well, think about it. If the program rigidly insisted right up front, you must believe in this specific God defined in this specific way, it would slam the door shut for millions of people around the world instantly.
Right, it wouldn't be global, it'd be a specific religious sect.
Exactly. So the sources really stress this point. Unlike, more rigid cults or dogmatic systems, a 12-step program explicitly tells you to choose your own concept of a higher power, your own understanding.
Choose your own concept.
That freedom, that invitation is maybe the most radical thing about it, especially considering when it was developed. The commitment isn't to a prepackaged doctrine. It's a commitment to just being open to the possibility that you're not the be-all and end-all.
So it's more of a psychological shift than a theological conversion then. It's about moving away from that failed strategy of relying solely on yourself.
Which, by definition, hasn't worked, or you wouldn't be there.
Right. Moving from that failure to just acknowledging, maybe tentatively, that there might be something else out there, something beyond your own stressed-out, run-down ego.
Precisely. It's about acknowledging limitation.
Okay, so if it's that flexible, what kinds of non-traditional concepts did the source material say people actually, latch onto? How do secular people make this work in practice?
Oh, they're incredibly diverse. And often they're quite beautiful in their simplicity, really. Some people start with the natural world.
Like, nature is my higher power.
Yeah. Or the universe, the cosmos, just the observable reality that's clearly bigger and more powerful than they are. Others go for more abstract ideas like collective consciousness, or maybe consciousness beyond the individual self. And a really common starting point, especially powerful for secular folks, is simply the group itself.
The meaning. the other people.
Yeah, recognizing the power of people coming together, trying to achieve something worthwhile, supporting each other, that collective energy, the shared wisdom in the room, the sheer fact that these other people understand, that can absolutely be the first tangible, benevolent power greater than yourself that you encounter.
That makes a lot of sense. It's concrete. You can see it and feel it.
It is concrete. And it demands maybe not belief in the supernatural, but definitely a suspension of, well, intellectual rigidity. You have to be willing to stop insisting you have all the answers.
I found one account you shared really striking. It was someone who basically started by just admitting, okay, there is something. I have no idea what it is, but it is definitely bigger than I am.
Yes, that's a perfect example.
And that simple, almost agnostic admission, that was enough. That was enough to get the ball rolling.
Absolutely. That's the genius of the phrasing "as we understood him" or "as we understand it." It allows for precisely that kind of initial ambiguity. The sources totally validate that starting point.
So you don't have to have it all figured out.
Not at all. For countless members, that something remains, well, a mystery. Maybe a beautiful mystery that they keep exploring for their whole lives. They move forward because they have faith in the results. They see the process working.
Okay. So the faith shifts. It's not faith in a specific definition of God, but faith in the mechanism that's bringing about sanity and change.
Exactly. They can see it working in themselves and others, even if they have to honestly say, I still can't tell you I've found God in a way I can perfectly define or understand. The proof is in the pudding, so to speak.
This really reframes the whole idea of spirituality, doesn't it? It detaches it completely from needing to follow a specific religious doctrine.
Completely. It becomes about a functional experience. It's about connection. The texts often describe the outcome, the spiritual awakening they talk about, as developing this profound sense of interconnectedness and relatedness.
Interconnectedness, yeah, that resonates because addiction is so much about isolation, isn't it?
Yeah.
Feeling cut off, different, alone.
Terribly isolating. So that moment, often in a meeting, when someone realizes, wow, my story isn't unique. These people get it. My suffering isn't some weird aberration. That's huge. It breaks down that wall.
The fear that you're the only one, that you're uniquely broken.
Right. That fear starts to dissolve because you see yourself reflected in others. You realize there's connection there. The text mentions removing that paralyzing fear that there was no alone. Suddenly, you're not alone.
So just to be really clear, how does the recovery framework, based on these sources, define spirituality if it's not organized religion?
They tend to strip it right down. It becomes about connecting with your own spirit, soul, or connection to source, whatever that means to you. Or sometimes even simpler, just your essence or life force.
Your inner self, almost.
Yeah, or your better self, maybe. The key is, the texts consistently steer clear of demanding specific rituals or belief systems. The focus is all internal alignment, getting honest with yourself, and external connection, relating to others honestly.
And the goal is that conscious contact, mentioned in Step 11, sought through prayer and meditation to improve our conscious contact with God as we understood Him. There it is again.
There it is again. That crucial qualifier.
But prayer and meditation, those words themselves can be another hurdle for atheists or agnostics. How do the sources make those practices accessible?
Again, by focusing on their pragmatic function, not necessarily their supernatural implications. Meditation, for instance, isn't presented as necessarily needing to be, transcendental levitation or anything.
Right.
It's often described very practically, like just taking quiet time to view thoughtfully the day ahead. Or calming the mind, quieting the internal chaos.
Like mindfulness, almost.
Very much like mindfulness, or just focused reflection in prayer. For many secular members, prayer becomes something like setting a clear intention for the day, or doing a mental inventory, or simply maybe just asking the universe or their own inner wisdom for the strength or the courage to do the next right thing.
So it's an internal tool, a way to check in, access your own values, maintain some self-control.
Exactly. It's a tool for self-management and accessing inner guidance, rather than necessarily being an appeal to some kind of external judge or deity who might intervene. It's about aligning yourself.
It really sounds like the ultimate justification for using this spiritual language boils down to one thing. It just works.
That's the pragmatic core of it all. If the process delivers results, sobriety, sanity, a better life, then the language, however you interpret it, is validated by the outcome. The program's universal appeal, its sticking power, lies right there. Its focus is relentlessly practical. The test isn't, is my theology correct? The test is, am I sober today? Am I living with more acceptance, more serenity?
Yeah.
The goal isn't necessarily theological enlightenment, it's achieving a fundamental personality change, a kind of spiritual awakening, yes, but defined as a surrender to life as it is.
And that surrender brings the real prize.
Which is ease in living,
Mm.
acceptance, serenity. That's the payoff that anyone, religious or not, can recognize and desire. It's independent of belief.
Okay, so to get to that ease in living, that hard-won serenity, you first have to go through what sounds like a pretty major internal demolition job. That's step one, right? Admitting you're powerless and life is unmanageable.
Yes, step one is the bedrock, and it's the crucial crisis point.
Why isn't it just about admitting you can't control the substance, like alcohol?
Mm-hmm.
The sources emphasize it's about the unmanageability of life itself. Why that broader scope?
Because step one is designed as the ultimate confrontation with the failure of self-will. Your inability to control your drinking is presented as Exhibit A. It's the undeniable evidence that your whole approach to life, which was probably built on trying to control everything and everyone through sheer force of will, manipulation, or denial,
Right.
that whole structure is fundamentally unmanageable. If you can't even manage this one thing you're drinking, how can you possibly claim to be successfully managing your emotions, your relationships, your reality?
So the substance problem is the proof that the underlying operating system is faulty.
Exactly. It exposes the bankruptcy of the ego-driven life.
And this is where the sources brought in that really interesting, almost mythological parallel. They link this addictive struggle for control to the irony of original sin. Can you unpack that a bit? It sounds potentially religious, but you suggested it's used metaphorically?
It is used metaphorically, and it's quite powerful when you strip away the dogma. The sources suggest the alcoholic's core ambition, often unconscious, mirrors that striving described in the Garden of Eden myth, wanting to be like God.
Wanting inappropriate control.
Yes, trying to exert absolute godlike control over everything, external circumstances, other people, and especially their own internal state, moods, feelings, emotions. And the substance, like alcohol, becomes the tool, the magic elixir they use in that attempt to control consciousness itself.
Trying to bend reality to their will, ultimately.
And the inevitable result of that doomed, ego-driven project is, well, getting kicked out of the garden. The total collapse of a manageable, ordered, sane life.
Wow. Okay, so that failure, that repeated painful demonstration that you can't impose your will successfully on reality, that has to hit hard. It leads to what the literature calls ego collapse at depth.
Yeah.
That sounds intense.
It is intense and often incredibly painful, but the sources suggest it's the common denominator in almost all successful, lasting transformations or conversion experiences, whether they happen suddenly in a moment of clarity or gradually over time.
So it's a necessary breakdown.
It seems to be. It's that point where the mind finally stops fighting reality, stops fighting itself. And interestingly, the sources point out that this isn't some mystical AA invention. Even historical research into like turn-of-the-century mind cure movements and other non-theological practices, they showed that some form of regeneration, some kind of healing, happens through relaxing by letting go. This psychological release is accessible even if you have zero theological beliefs. It's the sheer utility of just stopping the fight, ceasing the war with the universe and with yourself.
Okay, so the ego collapses, you accept powerlessness.
Yeah.
That sets the stage for cleaning up the wreckage, right?
Yeah.
Which brings us to dealing with character defects in steps 6 and 7.
Exactly. Step 6 asks you to become entirely ready to have God or your higher power remove these shortcomings.
But you mentioned something surprising earlier. The program advises against focusing too obsessively on everything that's wrong with you.
Yeah.
Why is that? Seems counterintuitive if you're trying to change.
It does seem counterintuitive, but it's psychologically quite clever, I think. Focusing too hard on your flaws can actually feed the very self-centeredness and self-obsession that the program is trying to help you move past.
Ah, right. More navel-gazing.
Kind of, yeah. Step 6 is more about humility. It's about presenting yourself honestly to your higher power, flaws and all, and acknowledging that you can't fix everything yourself just by gritting your teeth. It means you don't have to carry the entire burden of self-reformation through sheer willpower. And there's this other really crucial, subtle insight in the sources. What you initially identify as a defect or a shortcoming might actually contain the seed of a hidden strength.
How does that work?
Well, think about it. Maybe that obsessive energy you poured into obtaining and using alcohol once you're sober could be channeled into incredibly focused service to others, or into a creative passion. Or maybe that intense sensitivity that made you feel vulnerable could become deep empathy.
So it's not about annihilating parts of yourself.
No, not necessarily. The focus isn't on surgical removal or self-punishment. It's on willingness. Are you willing for these things to change? Are you willing to let go of the patterns that cause harm? The transformation might be more like redirection than elimination.
Okay, that makes the idea of surrender feel less like, well, annihilation and more like a practical decision.
Exactly. It becomes very practical. The sources say the real engine for change often kicks in when the person finally realizes deep down that it's simply more painful to stay in the old pattern than it was to risk something new and unknown.
The fear of the familiar pain finally outweighs the fear of the unknown future.
Precisely. The devil you know becomes undeniably worse than the devil you don't. The unknown starts to look like the only viable alternative. That's pragmatic surrender.
And this surrender, this willingness, it's linked to a fundamental shift in thinking, isn't it?
Yeah.
Kind of internal cleanup operation.
Absolutely. There's a core philosophy woven through the text, suggesting that while, okay, maybe a man cannot directly choose his circumstances, but he can choose his thoughts, and so indirectly, yet surely, shape his circumstances.
Choose your thoughts, shape your circumstances. That's a pretty bold claim. The sources seem to draw a very direct line between your inner mental world and your outer material reality.
They do, and they use some pretty stark imagery to make the point. The idea is presented that negative or bestial thoughts crystallize into habits of drunkenness and sensuality, which then sort of inevitably solidify into external circumstances of destitution and disease. And conversely, pure thoughts, thoughts focused on constructive things, on recovery, on service, they crystallize into habits of temperance and self-control. And those habits then solidify into circumstances of repose and peace.
It sounds a bit like early cognitive behavioral therapy, or even neuroplasticity, the idea that the thoughts you repeatedly think literally carve pathways in your brain and shape your life's direction.
That's a great way to put it. It's recognizing that your internal landscape directly influences your external experience. Your thoughts lead to feelings, feelings lead to actions, actions become habits, and habits create your life circumstances.
So if that's true, then achieving that serenity we talked about isn't some kind of happy accident. It requires real work, ongoing work.
Definitely not an accident. The sources are clear. Maintaining serenity is described as one of the beautiful jewels of wisdom. And it's not just handed to you. It's the direct result of long and patient effort and self-control.
Self-control over your thoughts and reactions, not over external events.
Exactly. That's the crucial distinction. You surrender the illusion that you can control everything out there. But in exchange, you gain the possibility of mastering your internal world, your reactions, your thoughts, your impulses. It's trading that destructive, exhausting fight for external control for a constructive, sustainable practice of inner management.
Okay, so once you've done that heavy lifting, internally confronting the ego, shifting thought patterns, the program seems to pivot. It moves outward into the relational steps. This is where that deep isolation that really defines active addiction starts to get dismantled, right?
Absolutely. The focus shifts from self to others and to repairing relationships.
And step 5 seems like the critical bridge here. Admitted to God, to ourselves, and to another human being the exact nature of our wrongs. The sources call this one difficult, but essential.
It's often seen as one of the hardest, but also one of the most liberating. It's where that internal inventory, that theoretical surrender, becomes concrete, spoken action. You have to actually tell someone.
And the result, according to the texts?
It's described as the beginning of true kinship with man and God, or again, man and your higher power, however you conceive it. And crucially, it marks the beginning of the end of that profound sense of isolation.
Why is sharing it with another human so important? Why not just with God or yourself?
Because speaking those secrets aloud to another person who listens without judgment breaks their power. It brings them out of the darkness of your own mind where they fester and magnify. It confirms you're not uniquely monstrous. You're just human with human failings.
So the power isn't about being judged or getting absolution in a religious sense. It's more about catharsis and connection.
It's hugely cathartic. That account you mentioned earlier described it perfectly. The act punctured the membrane of isolation I had lived in. Suddenly the secrets are out and you're still accepted.
And exposing those secrets, that helps reveal the underlying patterns.
Yes. It's not just listing bad deeds. The process forces you to look at the motivations behind them, often driven by fear. Like the source mentioned, someone realizing their fear of rejection led them to sabotage relationships, ensuring they never got close enough for true intimacy, a pattern they only saw clearly when they had to explain it out loud.
Wow. Okay. And the relief that comes from this sharing, The sources describe it quite dramatically.
They really do. One passage says something like, "The dammed up emotions of years break out of their confinement and miraculously vanish as soon as they are exposed."
Like letting pus out of a wound, maybe.
That's a good analogy. It's an emotional detoxification. By sharing the shame, the guilt, the fear, you rob them of their secret power. You free up all that energy you were spending on hiding, pretending, and defending. It's absolutely essential for moving forward and building genuine connections.
And that newfound ability to connect, to be honest, flows right into the next steps, 8 and 9, making a list of people harmed and then actually making amends.
Exactly. Steps 8 and 9 are explicitly concerned with personal relations. The texts say they mark the beginning of the end of isolation in a very active way.
So step 8 is being willing to clean up the mess.
Making the list, becoming willing, developing the courage, the honesty, and crucially, a sincere desire to set things right. Not just to make yourself feel better, but because it's the right thing to do for the people you hurt.
And then step 9 is the action, making direct amends wherever possible.
Right, going out and actually doing it.
Now, this is where the program shows, I think, a real ethical depth that goes beyond just feeling good about yourself.
Yeah.
The sources introduce this really important element of prudence.
Yes, this is critical.
Making amends isn't just blurting everything out. It requires good judgment, a careful sense of timing, courage, and prudence. That word prudence seems key.
It's hugely important. It's probably one of the most vital ethical safeguards in the whole process.
Why? What does it protect against?
It protects against causing more harm in the name of making amends. The primary mandate, woven through the guidance on Step 9, is always to ensure that your disclosure does not injure them or others.
Ah, okay. So your need to clear your conscience doesn't trump their right to not be hurt further by your confession.
Exactly. It's about ethical repair, not just self-serving catharsis. Let's say the amend involves revealing an infidelity that the other person never knew about and might be devastated by. Making a direct, blunt confession might cause immense, unnecessary pain.
So what do you do then?
In such cases, the amend might need to be indirect. It might involve a profound living amends, changing your behavior completely, dedicating yourself to being trustworthy and kind in that relationship, maybe making restitution in other ways. The focus has to be on the well-being and healing of the person harmed, not just on ticking a box for the person making the amends.
That requires real maturity, prioritizing their needs over your own relief.
It does. It's a serious ethical consideration.
But assuming you can make amends appropriately, what's the benefit of dredging up all that unpleasantness from the past? Facing those people, those situations, must be incredibly difficult.
It is difficult, no doubt, but the sources are clear. The benefit is freedom. Freedom from the past. That quote really captures it. Going back and facing something unpleasant, regardless of how tough it is at the time, is a lot easier than running away.
Why easier? Running seems easier.
Easier in the long run, because running means you're constantly looking over your shoulder. Those past harms, those secrets, those skeletons in the closet, they haunt you. They drain your energy. They can be huge triggers for relapse. Cleaning up the wreckage, truly facing it, and doing what you can to repair it brings a lasting peace that running away never can.
Makes sense. Okay, so you've worked through the internal stuff. You've started repairing external relationships. That leads us to step 12, carrying the message, practicing the principles.
Yes, the culmination, in a way.
Yeah.
But also the beginning of ongoing recovery.
Step 12 says that after having a spiritual awakening as the result of these steps, you try to carry the message to other alcoholics. And this is key, to practice these principles in all our affairs.
That last part is crucial. It's not just about alcohol anymore. It's a design for living.
And carrying the message, helping others. The sources suggest this isn't just a nice thing to do if you feel like it. It's presented as essential for your own continued recovery.
Absolutely essential. The program is fundamentally based on giving it away to keep it. One source states it bluntly. The way of AA is the way of service. Without that, it would not work.
Wow. Would not work. That's strong.
It is. The idea is you can get sober, maybe, through steps 1 to 11. You can achieve a certain level of personal stability. But that deep, abiding relief, that sense of purpose and contentment, that often only comes when you start turning your attention outwards and helping the next person who's still suffering.
Why does that work? Psychologically, what's happening there?
Well, for one thing, it constantly reinforces your own recovery. Explaining the steps to someone else reminds you of how they work. Seeing someone else get better gives you hope. But maybe most importantly, it gets you out of yourself.
Ah, combating that self-centeredness again.
Exactly. Active addition is incredibly self-focused. Service forces you to think about someone else's needs, someone else's pain. It cultivates humility, gratitude, and self-forgetfulness, all qualities that are vital for staying sober and living well. The entire strength of the fellowship, globally, relies on this desire of individual members to freely share what they've been given, their experience, their strength, their hope.
Okay, we've seen how the steps themselves offer this powerful psychological process, wrapped in flexible, universally accessible spiritual language. But for a movement like this to survive and thrive globally without splintering or becoming corrupted, it needs more than just individual steps. It needs a robust structure, right?
Absolutely. The structure outlined in the 12 traditions is just as important as the steps for ensuring its universality and longevity.
And Tradition 12, anonymity, is highlighted as perhaps the most important, the greatest safeguard the fellowship has. Why is anonymity so fundamental?
It works on so many levels, all aimed at keeping the focus on principles, not personalities, and maintaining humility. First, as you said, it's a safeguard for the cause.
How so?
By preventing individuals, especially leaders or founders, from becoming public figures, household names. Why? Because, as the text bluntly puts it, they might at any time get drunk.
Oof. Harsh reality.
It is, and if a famous AA spokesperson relapsed publicly, it could do enormous damage. It could give the whole society a black eye, as they say, and potentially crush the hope of newcomers who looked up to that person. Anonymity at the public level protects the message from the fallibility of the messenger.
That makes sense. But the sources also suggest it's not just about preventing scandal. It's also a powerful internal mechanism against ego, right? And even, surprisingly, a kind of PR strategy.
Exactly right. Internally, anonymity is a constant reminder. Principles before personalities. It reinforces humility. My story is important only as it can help someone else. I am not important. The message matters more than I do. That keeps egos in check, which is vital in a fellowship of people prone to self-centeredness.
And the PR angle. How does anonymity help with public relations?
It's actually brilliant in a counterintuitive way. By consistently refusing personal recognition, by stating clearly that the organization wants no personal publicity for its members at the level of press, radio, and films,
Yeah.
it completely disarms potential critics and even the media itself. Reporters often become friends of AA, the sources say, because they encounter this organization that genuinely doesn't want fame or glory. It's so unusual, so contrary to the usual self-seeking that it commands a certain respect. It ensures the focus stays on the program's purpose, helping alcoholics, not on promoting individuals.
That principle of humility, of detachment from power and prestige, seems to extend right into the organization's finances and structure too. The traditions express a real wariness of perilous wealth or power.
A deep wariness. There's a strong emphasis that the program should remain forever non-professional.
What exactly does non-professional mean in this context? Because obviously the organization has offices, publishes books, needs some structure.
Yes, and the literature clarifies this. Non-professional specifically refers to the core 12th step work, one alcoholic helping another. That act of sharing experience, strength, and hope must remain a free gift. It cannot be done for fees or hire.
So no paid counselors doing the core step work within the fellowship itself.
Correct. While AA employs people for service roles, managing offices, literature distribution, etc., the actual person-to-person work of recovery, the sponsorship, the sharing in meetings remains fundamentally an act of unpaid service. This preserves the vital peer-to-peer nature of the fellowship and prevents the spiritual core from being commercialized or turned into a business.
And if it's non-professional and anonymity prevents powerful leaders from emerging, where does the authority actually lie? Who makes decisions?
Authority is deliberately decentralized. It rests ultimately with the groups themselves. This is the concept of the group conscience.
The group conscience. How is that defined?
The traditions define the ultimate authority not as any person or governing body, but as a loving God as he may express himself in our group conscience.
Okay, back to that flexible God as we understood him idea, but applied to the group.
Exactly. In practical terms, it means the collective, informed wisdom of the members of a local group, guided by the principles of the 12 traditions, is the final authority on matters affecting that group.
So decisions are made collectively at the local level.
Largely, yes. Now, the sources do mention the role of elder statesmen members with long-term sobriety and experience. But they lead not by command or decree, but by quiet opinion, the sure knowledge and humble example. It's influence based on respect and wisdom, not formal power. This rotating, non-authoritarian structure is designed specifically to prevent the program from being captured or distorted by any individual's ego or agenda.
It sounds like a structure built on trust and humility, designed to protect the core principles.
That's precisely the intent.
Okay, let's zoom back out for a second. We've got the psychological steps, the flexible spiritual language, and this protective structure. Let's connect it all back to the fundamental human problem it's addressing. The source materials are pretty stark about the nature of alcoholism itself, aren't they?
They are. They state clearly that it's progressive, it inevitably worsens over time, and that it's incurable in the sense that an alcoholic can likely never safely return to moderate drinking. There's no going back.
And addiction more broadly is often framed as a response to, or an attempt to escape from, universal human suffering.
Yes. The desire to escape painful emotions is a huge driver. One source used the phrase, avoid, I'll do anything to avoid. That feeling of emptiness, fear, inadequacy. Addiction offers a temporary, false solution.
And neurologically, it becomes deeply ingrained.
Absolutely. Modern science confirms what early members observed. Repeated addictive behavior literally rewires the brain. It creates powerful neural pathways, often involving dopamine and habit centers like the dorsal striatum, that make the behavior automatic. Seeking and using becomes less a conscious choice and more a deeply ingrained compulsion, triggered by cues and aimed at getting that hit of pleasure, or, just as often, simply avoiding the pain of withdrawal or craving.
So the brain chemistry and structure actually change.
They do. The habit loop becomes automated, running largely outside of conscious control, deep in the older parts of the brain.
And this is where the practical, action-oriented nature of the steps becomes so crucial, isn't it?
Yeah.
You mentioned earlier how they engage the thinking part of the brain.
Exactly. This is where the psychology meets the neurology, you could say. If addiction operates automatically via the habit centers, like the dorsal striatum, the steps provide a structured way to fight back using the prefrontal cortex, the part of the brain responsible for conscious decision-making, planning, and impulse control.
How did that work?
Think about the actions required. Taking inventory, step 4. Admitting wrongs, step 5. Making amends, step 9. Consciously choosing service, step 12. These aren't passive activities. They require deliberate thought, reflection, honesty, courage, and planning. They force the individual to engage their executive functions.
So you're essentially using the newer conscious part of the brain to override the older automatic addicted part.
That's a great way to think about it. The rigorous, repetitive practice of the steps acts like cognitive behavioral therapy developed long before CBT had a name, designed specifically, as the text says, for the breakup of the sequence of addictive activities. You are intentionally interrupting the automated habit loop and building new, healthier pathways through conscious action.
And because this process relies on concrete actions and addresses a fundamental brain mechanism, that's what makes it potentially universal.
That's a huge part of its universality, the experience of suffering from addiction and the experience of finding relief through these specific actions and principles: connection, honesty, surrender, service. These are fundamental human experiences.
They resonate across cultures and beliefs.
Exactly. The source material notes how this message of shared suffering and shared recovery is easily passed among alcoholics, one to the other. It jumps across cultural, social, and religious divides because it speaks to a common human problem with a practical, structured solution that seems to work with our basic human psychology and even our neurology.
So in the end, the power really does seem to lie in the shared experience, the actions and results, much more than an agreement on theological details.
Precisely. The lived experience, the observable change, the connection with others on the same path that seems to be the engine, the flexible language just makes sure everyone can get on board to start the journey. #tag outro.
Wow. This has been a really, really insightful deep dive. We started out with that question. How does a program with such deep spiritual roots manage to not just survive, but actually flourish in our increasingly secular world? And what we seem to have found is that those spiritual principles aren't necessarily religious mandates in the traditional sense at all. They're actually incredibly effective psychological and relational processes. Things like surrender, radical humility, Rigorous honesty, making connections, getting outside yourself through service.
Right, powerful tools for change.
And they're just packaged, very deliberately it seems, in language that's open-ended enough, flexible enough,
Yeah.
to allow for individual, non-religious, secular interpretation.
Yeah, the genius really seems to be twofold. First, that incredible flexibility of the higher power concept. It basically says, whatever works for you, whatever helps you acknowledge you're not the center of the universe, that's okay. Start there. That opens the door. And second, once you're through the door, it's coupled with this very rigorous, very practical application of the steps. Inventory, amends, service. These aren't vague suggestions, they're concrete actions. And that combination provides a clear, structured psychological pathway out of that destructive cycle of self-will, self-centeredness, and addiction.
And that pathway works, regardless of your specific beliefs about God or the universe.
It seems to. Because the focus is relentlessly on tangible results, sobriety, serenity, change behavior, and on the power of shared human experience rather than on enforcing theological correctness, that pragmatic, experiential core seems to be the ultimate guarantor of its universality and its staying power around the globe.
So if we boil it down, maybe the core insight, the ultimate success of the program, comes from truly accepting deep down that you are profoundly not God. That the illusion of having absolute control is actually the source of the chaos, not the solution.
That feels pretty close to the heart of it, doesn't it? Letting go of that demand to be the director of the whole show.
Which leads us to our final provocative thought for you, the listener, to maybe mull over. If letting go of the illusion of ultimate control is key to this kind of spiritual progress, then ask yourself, what cherished belief, what personal ambition, what specific thing are you still holding on to with a white-knuckled grip? What demand for control might be subtly or not so subtly blocking your own path forward today?